Hello, everyone, and welcome to FECast episode 27. Today, we'll be talking about the upcoming championship. We're going to have an Expedition Championship this weekend, 2 days from this recording, in fact. And along with me on the cast is Breaker of Metagames himself, Chamomilk. How's it going?
It's going well, Citadel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. All right, so as you can probably guess what we're going to be doing on today's show, we're just going to be talking about the upcoming tournament, the Expedition metagame, especially with the release of Shadow of the Spires on Monday this week. We have a tournament this week, and there's going to be one person qualified for Worlds at the end of it. Just a quick rundown of the tournament. It's going to be Saturday starting at 9 a.m. Pacific and ending at 9 p.m. Pacific. If you are qualified, you'll play 15 qualifier rounds, and then the top 64 is going to battle out on Sunday as per usual. And I believe if you have the buys from getting 75 QCPs, you probably just play 12 games. It's not entirely clear, and I've also heard that this number of games is also changed from the original announcement.
Yeah, I heard that too. The original announcement was something like 20 games, and now it's 15. So presumably they've adjusted it based on how many people are actually participating. Although that's another difference from the last time is we don't know exactly who is participating this time around.
Yes, exactly. So we didn't get lists of people with buys or even people qualified, so we'll just have to see who shows up, how many people show up, and what the record is to advance to day 2. What do you think that's going to be? I expect, especially with, a significant number of people having buys, I'm expecting it's going to be something like 11-4 makes day 2.
Something like that seems reasonable. That would mean if you start with 3 wins and you play 12 games, that would mean you need to go 8-4 from those 3 wins, which is seems like a pretty reasonable cutoff. Yeah, might see a few people below that, but it kind of depends on how many have that 3-win bonus.
Yeah, I also don't quite remember how it happened last time, but I definitely, for like the draft championship last time, I definitely felt like there weren't enough games. We only played 10 games for that, right?
Oh
The
gosh, is
limited
that
was
right?
just, I think it was just 10 games for that one last time. I don't know what the constructed was. I think constructed, there were a few more games because they weren't expecting to go quite as long, but
Yeah, I
uh,
think constructed was something like it might have been something like 15 games or 18 or somewhere around there.
I want to say 18, but again, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I didn't participate in the draft one last time around, so I'm
Yeah, it was not a fantastic format, at least in my opinion. All right, so that's the event. Let's talk about how to do well in the event. So you've been known to break a few metagames, including the throne room deck. I don't know if it broke the metagame, but it's definitely a deck that people didn't see coming and going into the tournament, at least not people outside of the Friends of Eternal Discord, and it got Rexless into the top 8, so congratulations on that.
That was pretty exciting. It's some consolation that even though I wasn't able to make the top 64 with my deck, someone else did, and Rexilus made it all the way to the top 8. So good for him, and it's cool to see people doing well.
All right, so what's the hot tech for this week's tournament?
I mean, that's a really hard question to answer. You mentioned we just had the new cards drop on Monday, so it's been less than a week with these new cards. And if there's one thing we can say for sure, it's that these new cards are going to have an impact. There are some very
Oh, yes.
strong cards, some cards that are in practice a lot stronger than at least I thought they looked when I first saw the spoiler.
Yeah, even some of the cards that I thought were strong are ending up to be even stronger than I expected. Oh man, we're going to see a lot of these cards coming up. So we're going to run down the expected metagame, the big decks, and what they're big cards. What are the cards that make these decks run? So you were telling me before the show what deck you were planning on playing. Well, why don't you tell us about it?
All right, so for the first time in my Eternal career, I am thinking about bringing a mill deck to the qualifier round. In the ECQ and the Throne ECQ, the mill archetype made some waves. I think a couple different people brought it to the top 64, had some success there. Didn't make it all the way past that gauntlet, but a lot of those same cards are legal in Expedition, notably Savage Incursion, the spell that the opponent has 20 cards in their void. It will deal 3 damage, draw 3 cards, and play 3 dragons, and that is quite a beating. So it certainly has the top end for that deck. Personally, I've felt that the mill strategies often are a little too all in, and they run cards like Essence Feast, which is a card that costs 2 and deals 1 damage to every unit. But if you have 10 cards in the enemy void, it has lifesteal. And if you have 20 cards in the enemy void, then it really gets turned on. It gets deadly, so it kills all the units. But the thing is, it's hard to actually turn those on. And if they're not turned on, it's often just a bad card in your hand. So what I've been doing is experimenting with Splashing Fire. So I can play a Blazing Salvo and get the 2-cost market, and play cards like Essence Feast in the market, so that I don't just draw them when I don't really want them. And that's been a pretty fun and exciting build for me. And as far as cards from the new set that just dropped, I think a big tool for these primal and mill strategies is the card Turn to Seed. Really helps out against some threatening units by turning the unit, as well as every other copy in the owner's hand, deck, and void, into a 0/2 seedling that isn't scary for at least 5 turns.
Right. This is the 3-cost removal set, removal from the new set, Shadows of the Spire. What are some prime targets for Turn to Seed?
That's a great question. Kato, I think, is one of the big targets. There's still a lot of decks that are playing Katos and sometimes recurring them with Aramat's Machinations. And if they can get going, then you'll eventually face off this huge board of multiple 8/8s. So if you can shut that down early, I think it at least shut down some of their top end.
Yeah, it makes sense. Kato's a pretty unreasonable card. It closes out games
Yes.
very quickly.
Yes. Other cards are kind of some of the centerpieces of the decks we're going to be talking about next, and in particular the new Icaria, the mono shadow Icaria,
Yeah,
and the
6 cost
new
to kill a site or unit when you play her.
yes, and also when it dies, it makes them discard every spell from their hand, which can be a pretty big deal in these primal mill decks that usually are relying on a lot of their spells. So being able to just shut that down, turn it into something that has no more effect on the board, gives you a lot of time. Just against dragon decks in general, I guess, it gives you time to not die in the air to these big flyers while you're trying to set up.
Yeah, they invested a lot into their flyers. They usually don't do anything until they start attacking, so it makes sense that, unconditional removal, if it qualifies as removal, which I would say it does. It's 0/2 that doesn't do anything for 5 turns. It's pretty unassuming. Yeah, I think that would work really well. So, one question that came up that I don't want to forget before I lose it is that so I can really see that, like, Essence Feast needing to have 20 cards to really be worth anything is a big deal, right? Savage Incursion at least does something really significant, deal 3 and draw 3 if you have 10 cards in the opposing void. Is there any time where Savage Incursion, with the 20 cards in the opposing void, has not won you the game?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Actually, and I believe it was against one of these big boards where they had managed to reanimate some Katos and get several 8/8s on the board, and I was at a low health total, and the Savage Incursion just wasn't enough to dig me out of it. There have been other times where it was enough to dig me out of it, especially if I have a Tome of Horrors in play and attacking into my big dragons is enough to mill them out. So it's a strategy that it's obviously not a guaranteed win against some of these strategies, but it is very powerful, and I'm hoping it'll get the job done this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big payoff, right? I think we
Yeah.
can agree that that's just the big payoff. Essence Feast, I guess Essence Feast might have gotten you out of this board if you're facing up against a bunch of Katos, but like it goes from being not very good to being good when you have 20 cards, but it doesn't necessarily win you the game. It just sweeps everything.
Yeah, it really helps stabilize. It gains you life, so it helps stabilize your life total. A lot of the decks, I've faced a lot of decks that are recurring things from their void, and those are a lot more resilient against these kind of sweepers. They can often just rebuild or draw more cards and just keep up the pressure even after a board wipe. So there's a lot of competition out there.
Yeah. And I assume that this list is going to be posted in the Discord if anyone is interested in this and thinking of playing it this weekend, or just interested in playing it on the Expedition ladder. That's cool too.
Yeah, I just posted my latest iteration in the Friends of Eternal Discord, so if you're curious, you can check it out.
All right. Let's talk about some of the other decks that are going to be players this weekend. There's Mono Shadow, as we mentioned earlier, with the new Icaria, or there are variations on this deck. Not everything is Mono Shadow, right? I've
Right.
seen decks that have a little bit of fire and decks that have a little bit of time, but the idea is to be playing these cards that just have ridiculously heavy shadow influence, such as the new Icaria, which is a 6-cost 5/5 flyer that says when you play it, kill a unit or site. Not too many sites going on around right now, but nevertheless, that's a lot of value in one card. And then there's also New Aramont, which is a 3/5 deadly flyer, and it is pretty interesting. It's actually a lot better than I originally gave it credit for. If you hit someone, it turns into a curse for one turn, for that player's turn, that says it deals damage to them equal to the number of cards they play. Most people play about 2 cards per turn, sometimes 1, sometimes 3. But basically, it means that this Airmont is a 5/5 deadly flying. That's been my experience with it.
That's a good point, just to consider it as a 5/5 because it does that extra damage on offense. I guess I hadn't been thinking of it that way, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, so this Mono Shadow deck will often play that, as well as Impending Doom, and it also gets to play like Marionette Cross. So it has a lot of high investment cards that are very powerful. I think the issue with it is that if someone is playing a lot of little things, it can have difficulty keeping up, although Blightmoth does a pretty reasonable job of it. And that it doesn't have a very fast killing blow. Like, you're really relying on your huge flyers in order to finish the game, and that's that's something that can be taken out with removal plus some sort of card advantage engine.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think in theory, like these decks look like they should line up well against a lot of things. They have a lot of big butts, these 5 toughness creatures that should be resilient. But there are just a lot of decks that are flooding the board and going wide, and they might have a little trouble keeping up.
Yeah, I've actually found that, well, on Praxis Aggro, which we're going to get to next, I've actually found that this is one of the tougher matchups against Mono Shadow, especially if they dry out their early interaction. I think that's the real big thing. They're playing all these expensive, powerful cards, but sometimes it's just a little too clunky. They can't develop fast enough or efficiently enough in order to keep up. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an option. I don't see myself playing Mono Shadow, but I think it is a reasonable option for this weekend.
Yeah, I'm sure that we'll see some people running it, and who knows, maybe someone will have some spicy tech.
Oh, I guess you also get to play like Pale Rider's Timepiece or whatever it's called, but I don't know, that takes up the spot of New Icarian. I think New Icaria is better. I'm just thinking of cards that have very heavy shadow influence requirements.
Yeah, well, there's always like maybe like a Stone Scar list that tutors up the timepiece, but now I'm just kind of rambling on the theory, so we'll see.
All right, so onto the deck that I'll be playing. This is Praxis Aggro. You know that I love me a Praxis Aggro deck. So
Hmm.
this one takes advantage of new cards. Aurelian Supplier, that's the 2/2 charge for a 3 requiring time and fire influence. It says when you play it, if you have more units than your opponent, draw a card. If you have fewer cards in hand than your opponent, draw a card. So you can imagine a board state where you play a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and then you play the supplier, and then you draw 2 cards because you have more units in board, and because you've played more units, you have fewer cards in hand, and then you get to draw another card. So that card is pretty ridiculous. You also get to play the new Jack, which is absolutely ridiculous. I think that anyone that's played a couple games with this knows that it's just it's even better than it looks on paper. I think that, like, last week the Boxer and I were trying to talk people down on it. Nope. It's really that crazy. It really is that crazy. I mean, the thing that I missed about it is that it can hit face.
Mm.
Like, if you discard a sigil, hit face, and then that sigil becomes a treasure trove because well, let me just read off the card. It's a 2/3 for triple fire, costs 3, and it has when you play a Jack, you may pay 1 if you do, and pay 1 and discard a card. If you do, it does 2 damage to 2 enemies, and if you discarded a sigil, doesn't have to be a fire sigil, but does have to be a basic sigil. It can't be a seat or an emblem or anything. Then it gets double damage, and it gets double damage permanently. So what will often happen is your opponent has 2 medium-sized units. You play Jack, you discard a sigil, you kill both of them, and all of a sudden you have a 2/3 double damage. Or your opponent only has 1 unit, you kill it, you hit them in the face, and then you get a treasure trove to replace whatever the card is that you discarded. And it's ridiculous. And I think that it works best in a Praxis aggro shell, alongside the Aurelian supplier, which supplies the discard.
Yeah, that card, that new Jack, is definitely one that I was sleeping on a bit. I did not realize its potential when I first saw it, but having played against it now, it does so much work. In my mill deck, for example, I'm playing this 2/4 Stranger, the strange broker that mills the enemy player, and just kind of relying on that 2/4 body to really help hold the ground against aggro decks. And this new Jack means that if they have the sigil in hand and the Jack, they can shoot down 2 4 health blockers. That's quite a big deal.
It sure is. And of course, this deck gets access to the new Milos, which is the 3/3 Overwhelm Charge. When it hits an opponent, put a Firebomb in their deck, which is a fantastic aggro card. And you get to play Kato. I mean, Kato isn't absolutely insane. You're not doing a ton of stuff with the sacrifice energies, but I mean, Kato is just a very good card. You get 2 bodies. It helps fuel the Aurelian supplier. It threatens to Arc of Soul. I mean, it's the only cultist in my list, but I think just having the threat of being able to Arc of Soul when I play a Kato and attack with it, I think leads people into blocks that they would otherwise not make.
Yeah, Kato is certainly has proved its value.
Of course, the list is in the Discord, as are all of my tournament lists. If you're interested, go check it out. More reason to join the Friends of Eternal Discord. All right, let's talk about another deck that's been around for a while. This is Majestic Skies. I mean, we know this deck well. It's just got a lot of cheap flyers, and it gets a new card from the new set, Mother of Skies. This is a 2-cost 1/4, and it says whenever you play the first multi-faction unit of the turn, play a 1/2 Cloud Snake hatchling with flying. And I mean, these decks have evolved so that they're often playing more factions to take advantage of Mother of Skies, but I also feel like it's not quite enough to make these decks good, especially in the face of something like Blight Moth, which seems like an absolute beating for these decks.
Yeah. The Majestic Skies decks, before the most recent set was released, I had been climbing a bit with one of these Majestic Skies decks that also used the Throne Room, and that was a pretty solid deck. But I feel like since the new set has come out, I'm not sure it has quite the same staying power anymore to keep up with the power level of what some of these decks are doing.
Yeah, when you're playing 1/1 flyers and your opponent is playing Jack and shooting them down 2 at a time, I can't imagine it feels good.
Yeah, that's a big game against this deck, I think.
You mentioned the Throne Room, though. That's another card. I mean, it feels like old news now, but if you like, there very well could be a Throne Room deck out there. It's a very powerful card. It's just a matter of finding the right shell for it in time.
Yeah, I haven't found that shell yet. Neither have I found the shell for Mother of Skies, but they both look like they have potential, and maybe we'll see some breakout deck this weekend.
Another deck that is returning is the Strangers deck. I mean, Grodov Strangers and Makar Strangers have both suffered nerfs, but they're still pretty powerful alongside, well, I mean, whatever other Stranger synergies you might want. I'm not going to be able to name them off the top of my head, but like the Praxis Stranger of buffing your cards in hand, like that's a pretty good card. They've got the Justice Stranger. I guess that one's Kodosh's Stranger, right? It's an ancestor that doubles its attack each time it attacks. Like these are powerful cards. So I don't know what the correct build of Strangers is, or the best build. We've also talked about in the Discord about using strangers alongside weapons, right? With strange blacksmith as possibly a way of using strangers. Basically, all I'm saying is strangers are still out there. There might be a deck that shows up that really utilizes them in a powerful way. I don't know what it is because there are so many options, but I'd say be on the lookout for them.
Yeah, for sure. The stranger decks were well represented in the last expedition ECQ. In various combinations of factions, there was a lot of different ways to build strangers that did well because they're just doing a lot of powerful synergistic things. And I myself have been messing around with strangers in my own brews. I mentioned my Feln Scar Mill deck. I'm using a lot of strangers in that deck, including Linrise Stranger as a top end, which on summon causes a stranger to stun a non-stranger enemy unit, and when it attacks, it plays a 3/3 dragon for free. So there are certainly some powerful cards out there. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of stranger brews are brought to this tournament.
Yeah, I suppose I should also mention that in my Praxis deck, I'm playing Magnificent Stranger and the 2-1. I think it's Ruthless Stranger for 1 that buffs
Okay.
your other strangers. So, I mean, even if you're not playing a straight up Stranger deck, there's probably some Stranger synergies going on because there's a lot of powerful cards. You know, I actually did face a Feln Mill deck that had Horus Traver in addition to it, but you were also talking about how you think that some people are going too all in on the mill and just want to be playing some like more solid cards.
A little bit, yeah. That's why I'm running Linrise Stranger as a top end there. It
Yeah.
doesn't do anything for mill, but it's just comes into play. It maybe stuns a big enemy flyer or an 8/8 that they got off of Kato, and sometimes that's enough to stabilize long enough to get your Savage Incursion online.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big threat. Like, I suppose Vox players probably have good answers for it, and uh, Mono Shadow cards, Mono Shadow players playing Ikaria probably have really good answers for it as well. But a 4/5 like Fire decks are going to have trouble with that.
The 5 health is a pretty big mark, I think, to have 5 health on a unit in this meta now that Jack can shoot down the 4 health units.
Yeah, but we've also talked about how, well, trying to get outside the range of Jack might not be the best idea because then you just end up investing too many resources into one unit to lose it to something like Vox or Ikaria.
Yeah, that's well, that's also, I guess, the mono shadow decks that we talked about is those are really all in on these 5 health units, but still it's developing their board a little too slowly, maybe to keep up with these Praxis aggro decks all the time.
Yeah. All right. So I mentioned Vox decks. Those are still very much a thing. In fact, almost all the cards from the Boxers winning list are legal in Expedition. The big cards that you miss here are actually the crests, I believe. All the action spells are there, but the crests help you find exactly what you need and also to fix your power. I think are a big loss from the deck. What I've found is that your power in the deck is pretty bad, especially if you're playing like 5 factions. You can play 3 factions or 5 factions. You can add Kilo in there. I don't think it adds as much without because you don't have access to Snow Crush Animist. But sorry, you don't have access to Snow Crush Animist and also Even-Handed Golem. That's also a big loss.
Oh, yes. Well, you do have the Aurelian Supplier, which some people have nicknamed things like Odd Handed Golem or Aggro Handed Golem or Go First Handed Golem.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I've seen that card on the other side of the board a few times, and oftentimes I just have more units than my opponent, and it doesn't end up drawing cards. So I'm not sure how I feel about Aurelian Supplier outside of aggro decks, but I could be wrong. I could be biased based on the deck that I'm playing and the board states that I see. In any case, yeah, so all of these corrupted units, if you want to build a Vox deck, there's a really easy way to do it. You type in corrupted to the search bar and you start clicking on cards until you have a bunch of them in there. You add Voxes and you're pretty much done. That's pretty much the deck. Oh, Strange Burglar. Strange Burglar is an important one to that one.
Oh yeah, that's a pretty big one. These Firetime Shadow decks. Lately, I've been seeing them go away from Vox. I think the Boxer even posted a list on the Friends of Eternal Discord that is running main deck Aramont's Machinations, but is not running Vox and is not running as many corrupted units, and instead is running things like the new Jack to go along with Kindling Carver and a lot of sacrifice outlets for card draw. Cool interaction there is if you bring back Jack with Aramat's Machinations, since it gets Overwhelm, it can target 2 units, and overwhelm damage goes to the face and can draw you 2 treasure troves that way.
Yeah, knowing the power of Jack, I've thought about how to utilize this, but I feel like if you're trying to add a third faction and Aramot's Machinations, even if you do have some fixing in just hitting people with Arc of Soul, I do think you lose out on a little power and a little potency on the Aurelian supplier. So I'm not sure that this is the best way to do it, but it's definitely interesting. If you can actually play Machinations on Jack, you're getting some serious value off of it.
For sure, yeah.
What? How competitive do you think this deck is?
I'm not sure. I think the Praxis Aggro deck is better. It's more consistent, just at putting on pressure and getting its plays out, and it doesn't rely as much on setup with like the little 1/2 stranger to fix its influence. However, I mean these decks, they certainly have the top end. They can build a huge board of Kato and 8/8s, and certainly should not be overlooked, I'd say.
Yeah, be on the lookout for Vox decks or Jack and Nason's decks or just decks. If your opponent's playing the Destruction colors, which is Fire, Time, and Shadow, you better watch out for Aramot's Machinations on 5. You can probably tell if your opponent's trying to set it up. So those are the big decks. Oh, we had one more listed here. Kilo decks. I haven't seen any Kilo decks, but I haven't been playing. I've been mostly playing today.
I feel like a week ago, Kilo was a much hotter topic right before this new set dropped. Like when we only had the Mono Shadow cards that were coming from the new set, or maybe not only, but like the new Mono Shadow Icaria was one of the big deals. I remember seeing a Kilo Icaria deck. So 3 factions still trying to hit the 6 shadow influence for Icaria. But if you can do it, man, you Kilo the Icaria to
Into
sacrifice it.
Avara.
Yeah, make them discard all their spells on the Entomb trigger, and then into Vara, and you play it again and kill something on the Summon trigger, and it's just quite a beating.
Right. Murder of Crows was talking about that last week. Yeah, I mean, that sounds really good to me. It's just a matter of making the influence work out and making sure that it's not too clunky. But, I mean, I think if you're playing that type of deck, you probably want to have a lot of interactive elements, lots of removal in order to not get too far behind.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what kind of Kilo decks might be represented, because I feel like someone out there is going to find some sort of crazy brew with it, but I myself don't know exactly what it'll look like.
I suppose you might not have the fodder you would want in order to make that the deck, because, like, if you're playing Kilo, it's already a stretch to add the best fodder, which is Kato, right? Kilo and Kato are two cards that would be fantastic together, but it's a stretch on the influence. Well, I don't know. Maybe a 4 or 5 faction deck is out there. You could be right. I mean, unfortunately, the best way to fix the power outside of the interloper is Arc of Soul, and that's in Time, right? That's in the 5th faction, so you have to get really creative.
Yep. I don't know if we'll see the 5 faction deck like we saw in the Throne ECQ last month. There's not quite as many options for fixing. You don't have the crests. We'll see.
Okay, what about this? Just entertain me for a second. So, what if you play Kilo Strangers and you can use the Traver's farm in order to tutor for Interloper or Traver in order to get whatever influence you need in order to play whatever greedy cards that you want? Because you can play cards like Reunite, Traver's farm, that help find the interloper, and that will help you fix your power. And then you can just be playing a lot of undepleted power. Just figure out a way in order to make your power base work via sigils and seats.
That may be enough. Interloper in particular, since it has corrupted, goes really well with Kilo, because you sacrifice it or you chump block with it maybe, and then next turn you sacrifice the shade to go get something. So just having that extra fodder is great in the deck as well as the fixing.
All right, if that deck wins the tournament this weekend. You heard it here first. All right, that about wraps it up for our metagame breakdown. Editing Sunnyvale stepping in just to say that over the last several hours, I mean, it hasn't even been that long since I recorded the podcast with Chem Milk, we've seen a lot of this new Edge of Uprising Genev deck, and if you want to take a look at that and have discussion on it, join the Discord. We're talking about and trying to figure out what exactly is going on there, but it does seem pretty good. So, yeah, that's another deck that you might want to look out for this weekend. All right, back to the show. Any decks that you think are going to do particularly well, that you think are particularly strong? My money is on Praxis Aggro, and I wouldn't be surprised if someone figures out a build of Mono Shadow that's a little less clunky and still does the powerful things that it does.
Yeah, I think Praxis Aggro is going to be well represented. I'm really hoping that the mill plan works out for me. I've been practicing with it all week, so I'll probably just stick to what I know at this point rather than trying to take on some new deck. I feel like a lot of the decks right now are really focused on winning on the ground, so if somebody can figure out a good flying deck, whether that is some Elysian deck with Majestic Skies, or if it's another Dragons deck, just like a Stone Scar Dragons deck took down the last Expedition ECQ. Wouldn't surprise me to see some maybe Dragons or just Flyers decks represented.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, nothing happened to Stone Scar Dragons, right? I've seen a lot of Skycrag Dragons on the ladder, but I haven't really seen many people pick up. It was Virgin Mary, right? Was playing the Stone Scar Dragons list?
Yeah, with I think 2 or 3 volatility in the main deck, and the 5-cost Carve It. They had a playset of the 5-cost Carve It, and they had Dragon Forge, which could tutor for either the Pale Rider's Timepiece and get that lifesteal killer effect to get back the game, or there was the Noxious Wyvark, the 7-cost dragon that on summon gives -3/-3 to all of the units without flying, which in this, against Praxis Aggro, that seems pretty strong, right?
Yeah, that kills just about anything that's not the Thunder of Wings dragon, and I mean, it also is very good against decks that are playing like Vox decks, right?
Yeah, so I guess the big question is, can you survive that long? Because I believe, was that tournament out before even the last mini set, which had Milos?
Yeah, I believe so. I think so, right? Because maybe it was immediately after, because there were a bunch of nerfs to Rakano Aggro, and I speculated that was because they wanted to make sure that people could still play Milos without the deck being absolutely insane.
Oh, okay.
All right, well, there you have it. There are our picks for what's going to be good this weekend in the metagame, and for those of you looking for a metagame rundown, just want to know what decks are out there you have it. I guess that's about it for this week. We'll be back next week with a similar episode, except focused on Throne, preparing for the Throne Championship the following week. Following this weekend. Yeah, it's May 16th, I guess it would be, 16th and 17th.
Yeah, we have an interesting run of tournaments. I think 3 weekends in a row we have a big Eternal tournament this month.
So are we confirmed that we have a third tournament after that? I thought that was speculation that there's going to be another ECQ.
I'm not sure it's 100% confirmed, but I'm pretty sure I saw it advertised on their Twitch stream when they were doing one of their streams.
All right, that's exciting. We'll have more information for you when it becomes available. Thanks for listening, and of course, thank you to our patrons at patreon.com. These people help keep FECast going and help support Friends of Eternal. So thank you to Yeast Out, D-Dub, Chris Ye, Cam Milk, Steven, and Work Done Son. Thank you very much. If you would like to be like these lovely people, you can go to patreon.com/Friends of Eternal and donate. All right, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Good luck to everyone out there playing in the tournaments this week, and until next time, we'll see you in the friend zone.
Outro.
Friends of Eternal is awesome, but you know what's even more awesome? Our amazing patrons over at patreon.com. That's right, Friends of Eternal now has a Patreon where you can help support the content and initiatives of Friends of Eternal. If you enjoy FECast and you enjoy the Piloting Club and you want to join the people that make all this possible and sustainable, be sure to head over to patreon.com/Friends of Eternal and consider donating. Every little bit does help. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time on FECast.